The German Shepherd struck the ICU doors before anyone understood what he was trying to stop. He did not bark like a stray or throw himself around like a frightened animal. He planted his paws on the polished floor, lowered his scarred shoulders, and put his body between bed 4 and the man who had just told security he was family. Nurse Emily Carter saw the dog first, then the stranger's hand sliding back into his coat pocket. Then the old leather collar pressed flat against the dog's thick neck. By the time the night shift monitor alarm changed tone behind the glass, half the hallway had already decided the dog was the problem. Emily had been 12 hours into her shift, the hour when the ICU became both quiet and sharp. Machines whispered, nurses moved without wasting steps. Families slept crooked in vinyl chairs or stared into paper cups of coffee gone cold. Bed 4 had come in after a late-night roadside accident, unidentified at first, listed as a possible transient male with head trauma and signs of agitation before sedation. His chart called him Daniel Hayes only because a bent piece of metal in his belongings carried the name Hayes, D, and even that had not been confirmed. He had no phone, no wallet, no emergency contact that made sense, and now, suddenly, a large German Shepherd in a faded working vest was guarding him like a door no one had permission to open. The man at the doorway looked too clean for the story he was telling. He wore a gray wool coat, despite the warm air blasting through the hospital. Vents and his visitor sticker had been pressed on crooked, as if he had picked it up while thinking about something else. I'm his cousin. He had told Mark Ellis from security. He doesn't do well with hospitals. I need to see him before you people make this worse. It was the kind of sentence that sounded caring from a distance, but Emily noticed what it did to the patient. Daniel's heart rate rose before the man even reached the threshold. His fingers, lax against the sheet a moment earlier, tightened until the IV tape wrinkled. Rex noticed it too. Emily did not know the dog's name yet, but she would remember the way he moved for the rest of her life. The German Shepherd's ears tipped forward, his nose flared once, and his body shifted a few inches left, not randomly, not wildly, but exactly into the path the stranger would need to cross. When the man tried another step, Rex gave one low warning sound that seemed to come from the floor itself. Security reached for the loop of rope someone had tied to the dog's vest, but Emily lifted her hand before she could stop herself. Don't pull him, she said, keeping her voice low enough that it would not sharpen the air. Back up first. Mark Ellis looked at her like she had forgotten her badge was plastic and his was metal. Nurse Carter, this is not your call. Emily kept her eyes on the patient, not the argument. The oxygen line was clear. The monitor was still within range, but the pattern had changed. Daniel Hayes was not awake, yet his body was reacting as if some buried part of him knew who stood outside the glass. Emily had seen fear before. She had seen pain, withdrawal, panic, and the strange silent fight of men who came into hospitals with old wars still living under their skin. This was different. This reaction had timing. Dr. Vanessa Cole arrived with the expression she wore whenever a problem threatened to become visible. Her white coat was buttoned, her tablet already open, her mouth set in a line that made younger nurses straighten before she spoke. Why is there an animal in my ICU? She asked. No one answered quickly enough, so Mark did. Came in after the ambulance. Wouldn't leave the patient. We were about to remove it. Then remove it. Emily turned from the monitor. Doctor, I think we need to verify the visitor before he goes in, doctor. Cole's eyes moved from Emily to the stranger and back again. He says he's family. The chart says there is no confirmed family contact. The word settled badly. A few heads turned toward the computer station. The stranger gave a small laugh, but it came too late to feel natural. Hospitals always lose paperwork, he said. Ask him when he wakes up. At the sound of his voice, Rex's lips lifted just enough to show the edges of his teeth. Not an attack, not chaos. A warning drawn with discipline. Emily felt the old memory of her father's hands gripping a kitchen table years after he had left the army, his voice telling her that good dogs did not waste their warnings. They read what people missed. They remembered what people buried. She did not say that memory out loud. Hospitals punished feelings when they came from nurses, especially night nurses who had learned to survive by being useful instead of important. Emily only stepped closer to the glass and watched Daniel's face. The patient was pale under the ICU lights, bruised along one cheekbone. A strip of dried blood still caught near his hairline, where the trauma team had cleaned too quickly. He looked less like a dangerous man than an exhausted one. His breathing stayed controlled until the stranger leaned sideways for a better view. Then the pulse line jumped again. Rex moved with it. See, Mark muttered, the dog is escalating. No, Emily said. The patient is doctor. Cole's face hardened, not because Emily had shouted, but because she had contradicted her quietly in front of witnesses. "Nurse Carter, your concern has been noted." That phrase was always a door closing. Emily knew it. Everyone in the ICU knew it. Concern noted meant nothing would change unless something went terribly wrong. "He is intubated and sedated," Dr. Cole continued. "This animal is interfering with care and creating a liability issue. Security will remove it, animal control will be contacted, and the visitor will be processed according to policy." "Policy also says unidentified patients require verified contacts," Emily answered. Her voice shook only at the end. She hated that. For the first time, the stranger looked directly at her. His eyes did not carry grief. They carried calculation, the cold little measurement of a man deciding whether a nurse mattered enough to stop. Emily felt the weight of that look, but Rex reacted before she could name it. The German Shepherd stepped away from the door just far enough to stand beside her. His shoulder brushed her knee. It was not affection, it was placement, protection. Every person in that hallway saw it, and still Mark reached for the rope. Rex did not lunge. He turned his head and stared at Mark's hand until the security officer slowed. That pause should have been enough. It should have made someone ask why a trained dog would guard a patient, warn at one visitor, calm for one nurse, and never once strike without reason. Instead, Dr. Cole mistook control for threat. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said. "The dog is unpredictable." Emily looked down at the scars on Rex's muzzle, the old wear on his vest, the faded patch where letters had been removed. He was not unpredictable. He was working without anyone willing to understand the job. "Give me 5 minutes," Emily said. "Let me call the admitting nurse and check the transfer notes. If he really is family, we document it and move forward. If he isn't, we keep an unidentified trauma patient safe." Dr. Cole stared at her as if safety itself had become insubordination. Around them, the monitors kept their thin electronic rhythm. Behind the glass, Daniel Hayes lay between machines and mystery, unable to tell anyone why a German Shepherd would rather be dragged away than leave him with the man at the door. Rex's collar caught the light when he turned, and Emily noticed a narrow strip of metal tucked under the leather, worn almost smooth. She might have missed it if he had been any other dog. But Rex lifted his chin at that exact second, not toward Dr. Cole, not toward security, but toward Emily as if offering her the only clue he could. The tag was old, darker than the hardware on the vest, and something had been engraved along the inner edge. Emily could not read it from where she stood. She only saw 3 letters before Rex lowered his head again. Hay Hayes, the same name on the unconfirmed belongings. The same name no one had bothered to protect. Dr. Cole closed the tablet. The sound was small, but the decision inside it was not. Enough. "Nurse Carter, you are relieved from this room." Emily felt the hallway tilt around that sentence. "Doctor, you will step away from the patient. Step away from the animal and report to the supervisor's office. If you refuse, security will escort you out." Rex's ears rose. Daniel's monitor skipped again. The stranger took half a step toward bed 4, and the dog's warning returned, deeper this time, full of old training and old grief. Dr. Cole did not look at the patient. She looked only at Emily. "Remove the dog," she said, "or remove the nurse with him." The order hung in the ICU hallway like a sentence already carried out. Remove the dog or remove the nurse with him. Emily Carter felt every eye turned toward her, not with curiosity now, but with the quiet relief people felt when trouble had finally chosen someone else. Dr. Vanessa Cole stood beside the workstation with her tablet tucked against her chest, waiting for Emily to make the wrong move. Mark Ellis shifted his hand closer to the rope tied to the German Shepherd's faded vest, and beyond the glass, Daniel Hayes lay still beneath the pale hospital lights, his body speaking in numbers no one seemed willing to read. Emily did not step toward the dog. She did not raise her voice. She did what her father had taught her to do when a room was full of men waiting for a reason to call her emotional. She slowed down. She looked at the patient first, then at the visitor, then at the monitor. Daniel's pulse was still elevated. The stranger had not even crossed the threshold, and yet the patient's body had already begun fighting a battle no one else could see. Rex stood angled between them, not blocking care, not threatening the nurses, not interfering with the ventilator or the IV pumps. He was blocking one man. "Doctor," Emily said carefully, "I'll step away if you want me off the room. But before anyone allows that visitor in, please verify his paperwork against the chart." The stranger sighed as though she were wasting precious time. "This is ridiculous. He's unconscious. He needs family." Rex's ears sharpened at the word family. A low sound moved through his chest, so controlled it barely qualified as a growl. Emily saw Mark's hand tense, saw Dr. Cole's jaw set, saw the whole scene bending toward the simplest story: dangerous dog, stubborn nurse, worried relative. It was the kind of story that protected the hospital from questions. It did not protect Daniel Hayes, doctor. Cole turned her head toward Mark. Escort Nurse Carter to the supervisor's office, then remove the animal. Mark stepped forward. Rex moved before Emily did. The German Shepherd did not snap, did not leap, did not even bare his teeth this time. He simply placed his body between Emily and security, shoulder brushing the side of her leg with a steadiness that made the hallway fall strangely. Quiet. It was not wild loyalty, it was assessment. Rex had decided where the next threat was coming from, and his answer was not the nurse. For a heartbeat, Emily felt the warmth of him through her scrub pants. He smelled faintly of rain, antiseptic, and old leather. Up close, she could see the years on him, a scar along the bridge of his muzzle, gray at the corners of his eyes, one edge of his right ear notched by something that had healed long ago. This was not a lost pet that wandered after an ambulance. This was a working dog who had seen too much and had not forgotten his job. "Get him back," Dr. Cole said. Mark lifted both hands now, more embarrassed than brave. "Nurse Carter, move away from the dog." Emily looked down at Rex. She kept her voice low, not commanding, not pleading. "Easy, boy." The change was immediate. Rex did not relax completely, but the tight line of his back softened by a fraction. His eyes never left Mark, yet he allowed Emily to take one slow step sideways. A murmur passed through the nurses near the station. Dr. Cole noticed it too, and the recognition only seemed to irritate her more. A dog who listened to Emily made Emily harder to dismiss, so the doctor dismissed both. "You are creating a safety hazard," Dr. Cole said. "You are relieved from duty pending review." The words landed harder than Emily expected. Relieved from duty sounded clean on paper. In the hallway, it meant humiliation. It meant the charge nurse stepping forward with an expression of practiced sympathy. It meant someone else taking over her patients while the room pretended not to stare. It meant the stranger outside bed 4 lowering his eyes for half a second, not in grief or concern, but in satisfaction. Emily swallowed and turned toward the charge nurse, Maria Benton, who had been standing near the medication room with her arms folded tight. "Daniel's neurochecks are due in 12 minutes, Emily said. "His pressure has been sensitive to stimulation. He reacted twice when that man approached. Please document that." Maria's face flickered. There was worry there, but not enough courage to use it. "I'll handle the assignment." "Document it," Emily repeated softly. Dr. Cole cut in before Maria could answer. "That will be all." Emily unclipped the small patient phone from her pocket and set it on the workstation. Her hand went next to her badge. For a second, her fingers would not obey. That badge was not glamorous. It was scratched at the edge and slightly cloudy from too many cleanings. But it had been on her chest through codes. Christmas shifts, double storms, dying fathers, grateful daughters, angry surgeons, and old veterans who apologized for needing help. Removing it in front of the ICU felt like being erased by people who had never bothered to see her clearly in the first place. She unclipped it anyway. Rex watched the badge come off. Then, without warning, he broke away from Mark's loose grip and stepped straight to Emily. Mark cursed under his breath, but Rex did not run. He pressed his muzzle into Emily's hand with a force that was almost urgent. At first, she thought he was seeking comfort. Then she felt the hard edge of the collar beneath her palm. Rex pushed again, turning his neck slightly. Guiding her fingers toward the underside of the leather, Emily froze. The collar was old, darker near the buckle where years of handling had polished it smooth. One section felt thicker than the rest, as if someone had folded leather over something and stitched it back by hand. Rex nudged her wrist again, more insistently this time. Not affection. Not fear. Communication. Before she could look closer, Mark grabbed the rope. Rex's head lifted, and the hallway hardened all over again. The German Shepherd turned enough to place himself in front of Emily, body low, eyes fixed on Mark's hands. Still no bite, still no chaos. Just a clear warning drawn by an animal trained to use every step before violence. "See," Dr. Cole said, voice rising. "This is exactly why he cannot be here." Emily kept her palm open at her side, the place where the collar had touched still tingling. "He's not trying to hurt me. He is preventing staff from doing their jobs. He's preventing the wrong person from getting close to my patient." That was the sentence that sealed it. Dr. Cole's expression went cold in a way anger never could. "He is no longer your patient." No one spoke after that. Not Maria, not Mark, not the young resident standing by the supply cart with his mouth half open. Emily realized then how hospitals could become cruel without anyone deciding to be cruel. People simply chose the safer silence, one by one, until the only voice left sounded unreasonable because it stood alone. Mark escorted her down the hallway, though Emily walked before he could touch her elbow. Rex resisted for 3 steps, then stopped at the ICU doors and looked back toward bed 4. Through the glass, the stranger had shifted closer again. He held a folded piece of paper in one hand now, offering it to Dr. Cole as if paper could become truth through confidence alone. Daniel's fingers moved against the sheet. Rex saw it and gave one sharp, contained bark that snapped every head toward the room. Emily turned despite Mark's warning. "Look at the monitor." Dr. Cole did not. She was reading the paper. The bark came again, shorter, desperate in a way Rex had not been before. He lunged toward the glass, not at the doctor, not at security, but toward Daniel. The motion pulled the collar sideways, and Emily saw it clearly for the first time. A narrow inner strip of metal tucked beneath the worn leather, engraved so faintly the letters nearly vanished under the ICU lights. She caught only part of it before Mark moved her farther down the hall. Rex stays. The word struck her in a place deeper than reason. Rex stays. Not Rex belongs. Not Rex's property. Rex stays. It sounded like an order, the kind someone gave when they knew they might not be alive to repeat it. The supervisor's office was colder than the ICU and smelled of printer toner and stale coffee. Maria did not come. Dr. Cole did. She stood near the doorway while the night administrator, a tired man named Paul Henson, filled out a temporary suspension form with the detached sadness of someone who had done this too often to feel the shape of it anymore. Unsafe conduct. Failure to comply with physician instruction. Escalation involving unauthorized animal in critical care area. Each phrase made Emily sound reckless. None of them mentioned the visitor. None mentioned Daniel's pulse. None mentioned the dog placing his body between a sedated patient and a man no one had verified. Emily listened until Paul slid the form toward her. "You'll be contacted after review. I need my concern documented," she said. Dr. Cole exhaled. "Your concern has been documented." "No," Emily said. "My actual concern, unverified visitor requesting access to an unidentified ICU patient. Patient shows physiological stress response when visitor approaches. Military-style working dog demonstrates selective protective behavior toward patient." Paul hesitated with his pen above the page. For one brief second, Emily thought he might write it. Then Dr. Cole stepped closer. "This meeting is not a charting session." Emily looked at the blank space where truth should have gone. She understood the lesson being offered. Leave quietly and maybe keep a career. Push harder and become the kind of nurse hospitals warned each other about. Her father's voice came back to her, worn and gentle at the kitchen table. "You don't have to win every fight, Em, but you better know which ones you'll regret walking away from." A sound rose from the hallway before Emily could answer. Not shouting, not barking. A scramble of shoes, a security radio crackling, someone saying, "How did he get loose?" The office door swung wider, and Rex appeared at the far end of the corridor. He was not running wild. He moved with purpose past the vending machines, past the elevators, past 2 startled visitors clutching paper cups. A frayed rope dragged behind him. His eyes found Emily immediately. In his mouth was not a weapon, not a stolen chart, not anything that made sense to the people chasing him. It was his own collar, pulled loose at the buckle, hanging from his teeth like evidence. Rex stopped in front of Emily and dropped it at her feet. Then he stood over it, breathing hard, daring the entire hospital to ignore him again. For a moment, no one in the supervisor's office moved. The suspension form sat half-signed on the desk. Dr. Cole stood with one hand still on the doorframe. Paul Henson's pen hovered above the blank line where Emily Carter's version of the truth had not been allowed to exist. And Rex, the old German Shepherd K9 everyone had called dangerous, stood over his collar like he had just delivered the only witness brave enough to speak. The leather lay at Emily's feet, dark with age, bent where years of service had shaped it around a powerful neck. It should have looked ordinary now that it was off the dog. Instead, it seemed heavier than anything in the room. Rex's chest rose and fell hard, but he did not back away. He kept one paw close to the collar, not touching it, not guarding it from Emily, only from the hands gathering behind him. "Somebody grab that dog," Dr. Cole snapped. Rex's head turned a fraction. He did not growl. He did not need to. The hallway outside had filled with security, nurses, and a few stunned visitors who had followed the sound of radios and running feet. No one stepped forward. They had seen him come straight to Emily without hurting anyone. They had seen him drop the collar, then wait. Even people who wanted the simplest explanation could feel the shape of something stranger pressing through the room. Emily crouched slowly. "Easy," she whispered, though she was no longer sure whether she was calming the dog or herself. Rex lowered his nose toward the leather and nudged it closer to her fingertips. That small movement changed the air. He was not asking to be freed. He was asking to be understood. Mark Ellis appeared behind him, breathing hard, one hand at his radio. He slipped the buckle. I don't know how. Emily did. Not exactly, not mechanically, but she understood the intention. Rex had not escaped because he wanted out of the hospital. He had escaped because the collar mattered more than the rope, more than policy, more than the fear surrounding him. She picked it up with both hands. The inside of the leather was warm from his body, and beneath the worn lining her thumb found the raised seam she had felt earlier in the ICU hallway. Do not tamper with that, Dr. Cole said. I'm not tampering, Emily answered. I'm looking. You are suspended. Then document that a suspended nurse is the only one reading the evidence your staff almost threw away. The sentence startled Emily as much as it startled everyone else. She had not meant to sound brave. She was tired, embarrassed, angry, and afraid in a way that made her hands steadier than they should have been. Her badge was gone. Her job was hanging by a thread. But the collar in her hands had brought Rex through locked doors and half the hospital to find her. Walking away now would be worse than losing anything they could take. Paul Henson shifted in his chair. He was not bold, but he was not blind either. Vanessa, he said carefully, if there's identifying information on the collar, we should probably note it, Doctor. Cole gave him a look sharp enough to stop most people. Paul looked down at the form instead. That was all the permission Emily needed. She turned the collar toward the desk lamp. At first, the metal strip inside the leather reflected only scratches. Then, as she angled it lower, letters began to rise out of the damage, not printed, engraved by hand or by a tool used with an unsteady grip. The first words were faint, almost swallowed by years of sweat, rain, and dust. If I don't make it, Emily's throat tightened. The office vanished for a second. She heard the machines of the ICU again, the low warning in Rex's chest, the stranger saying family with a mouth that did not believe the word. She ran her thumb just beneath the engraving without touching the letters directly. What does it say? Paul asked. Emily read the next part silently first, because some words deserved the respect of being understood before they were spoken. Rex stays with Hayes. The room did not make a sound. Even Mark's radio seemed to quiet between bursts of static. Rex, standing at Emily's side now, gave one slow breath through his nose and sat, not collapsed, not relaxed, sat, like a soldier waiting for confirmation that the message had been received. Emily looked at Dr. Cole. The collar names the patient. The chart already says Hayes, Dr. Cole replied, but the strength had left the edges of her voice. The chart says unconfirmed. This collar says Rex belongs with him, or was ordered to stay with him. Paul leaned forward. Is there a signature? Emily adjusted the leather again. The final engraving had been tucked near the buckle, half hidden by a fold where someone had repaired the collar long ago. The initials came first, then a name worn thin but still readable, N. Pierce under the name was a second marking, smaller and cleaner than the rest. A number, not a phone number, not a pet license. It had the compact rhythm of issued equipment, letters and digits separated by short dashes. Emily did not know what it meant, but Rex did. When she said the name quietly, Nolan Pierce, the German shepherd's entire body changed. His ears lifted, his spine straightened. The gray around his eyes seemed to disappear beneath an alertness so sudden it felt like a younger dog had stepped out of the old one. Rex turned toward the ICU, not the front exit, not the security officers, but toward Daniel Hayes. A sound came from him then that was not a bark or a growl. It was almost a breath caught in memory. No one laughed now. Mark's expression shifted first. He had come to the office ready to contain an animal. Now he looked at the collar as though it had become someone's last letter. Paul stood from his desk and reached for a clean evidence envelope from a drawer used for patient valuables. He hesitated before offering it, and Emily appreciated that he did not try to take the collar out of her hands. Dr. Cole recovered faster than the rest of them. This does not change the immediate safety issue. The dog still cannot be loose in the hospital. Then keep him with me, Emily said, or with someone he accepts. But do not send him away from that patient. You are in no position to make demands. I'm not demanding. I'm telling you what the dog has been trying to tell us since he hit the ICU doors. Before Dr. Cole could answer, an older man stepped into the hallway behind the security officers. Marcus Bell, night orderly, linen cart half full beside him, had worked at St. Agnes Memorial longer than most doctors stayed in one department. He moved slowly because his left knee had never fully forgiven him, but his eyes missed very little. Emily had seen him calm families with coffee, find missing hearing aids, and talk confused veterans through scans without making them feel ashamed. What name did you say? Marcus asked. Emily looked up. Nolan Pierce. Marcus' face changed in a way that made Dr. Cole finally go still. It was not recognition exactly. It was the shadow of recognition passing over an old room. Spell it. Emily did. Marcus stepped closer, careful not to crowd Rex. The dog watched him, then allowed the distance. That alone told Emily something. Rex did not accept everyone, but he did not warn at Marcus. I was Navy medical before I came here, Marcus said, voice lower now. Quartzman, long time ago. I saw names pass through. Pierce might be nothing. But that number you're looking at is not a county dog tag. Paul picked up his pen again. What is it? Marcus bent just enough to see without touching. Looks like a military working dog record format. Or close enough that somebody needs to call someone who knows for sure. Dr. Cole folded her arms. We are not turning an ICU incident into a military matter because of an old collar. Marcus looked toward the ICU hallway. Mom, with respect, the dog already did. The quiet after that was different. It had weight. Emily could feel the story trying to rearrange itself around facts people had been stepping over. Daniel Hayes was no longer only an unidentified trauma patient. Rex was no longer only an unauthorized animal. Nolan Pierce was no longer only a worn name on leather. 3 pieces had appeared, and they fit too neatly to be coincidence. Emily asked for Daniel's intake belongings. Dr. Cole refused at first, but Paul, perhaps sensing that the hospital's safest path had changed, directed Mark to retrieve the sealed property bag and bring it to the office. They waited in a silence broken only by Rex's breathing and the distant hum of the ICU. Emily kept the collar on the desk where everyone could see it. She did not hide it. She did not pocket it. Truth, she knew, became harder to bury when placed in the open. When Mark returned, the bag held what the chart had barely mentioned. Torn clothing, a cracked watch, a strip of cloth from inside Daniel's jacket, and the bent metal tag Emily had seen listed only as unrentable personal item. Marcus pulled on gloves before touching anything. He turned the cloth under the light. Half a patch had been cut away, but the remaining thread showed a trident-shaped fragment and 3 letters near. The torn edge. Dr. Cole's mouth tightened. That could be anything. Marcus did not argue. He lifted the bent tag next. It was scratched nearly smooth, but when angled against the lamp, the name appeared more clearly than the chart had admitted. Hayes D. Below it was a partial service number. Paul sat back down, slower this time. Why wasn't this entered as identification? No one answered. That was the first honest response Emily had heard all night. Then Maria Benton appeared at the doorway, pale under the fluorescent light. Dr. Cole, she said, the visitor is asking to transfer bed 4 before sunrise. He says he has authorization from the family and a private ambulance ready. Within the hour, Rex stood before anyone else reacted. The collar on the desk trembled from the movement. Emily looked at the engraved words again. And suddenly they did not feel like memory. They felt like warning. If I don't make it, Rex stays with Hayes. And someone was trying to separate them before morning. Maria Benton's words changed the temperature of the office. The visitor is asking to transfer bed 4 before sunrise. For 1 second, no one argued, because the sentence was too specific to be harmless. Before sunrise did not sound like a family member begging for comfort. It sounded like a deadline. Emily Carter looked from Maria to the collar on Paul Henson's desk, then to Rex, who had risen so fast the old leather had trembled under the desk lamp. The German Shepherd was not looking at Maria. He was staring down the hallway toward the ICU, ears forward, body still, waiting for the humans to catch up. Dr. Cole recovered first. A transfer request does not prove misconduct, she said. Families request them all the time. He is not verified family, Emily answered. He has paperwork. He has paper, Marcus Bell said quietly. That's not the same thing. Dr. Cole turned on him, but Marcus did not look away. There was no rebellion in his face, only the fatigue of an older man who had spent enough years around hospitals and uniforms to know when something did not smell right. Paul Henson pushed his chair back and reached for the phone. I'm calling legal, he said, until they review the authorization. No transfer leaves this building. The relief that passed through Emily lasted less than a breath. Maria shook her head. Doctor. Cole already told transport to prepare the chart. The private ambulance is 10 minutes out. Rex gave one sharp bark. It cracked through the hallway and sent 2 security officers stepping back, as if the dog had spoken in a language they almost understood. Emily moved toward him, not touching him yet, just entering his line of sight. Easy, Rex. The name came out naturally now. Rex turned his head a fraction, enough to acknowledge her, then looked back toward Daniel's room. His meaning was painfully clear. The collar had been delivered, the message had been read. Now the patient had to be kept where he was. Emily knew she had no authority left. Her badge sat somewhere in a drawer or on a supervisor's clipboard. Her name was already attached to a suspension form. But Daniel Hayes was still in bed 4, still voiceless, and someone was trying to move him under the cover of paperwork and night shift exhaustion. She could not enter the ICU as his assigned nurse anymore. She could not chart. She could not give orders. What she could do was stand where the hospital could not pretend she had seen nothing. Paul started down the hallway with Legal on the phone. Doctor. Cole followed, speaking in tight professional phrases about patient safety and unauthorized interference. Maria lingered just long enough for Emily to catch her arm. Has anyone documented his reaction to the visitor? Maria's eyes dropped. I noted elevated pulse during stimulation. During visitor approach, a long pause answered before she did. No, Emily let go. The disappointment hurt more because Maria was not cruel. She was scared, overworked, and trained by years of policy to write sentences that could not accuse anyone. Then look again, Emily said. Please, before he's gone. They reached the corridor outside ICU just as 2 transport staff rolled an empty stretcher toward bed 4. The stranger stood near the doors with the folded authorization in one hand and Daniel's belongings bag in the other. He had removed his visitor sticker and replaced it with a temporary transfer badge Emily had never seen issued so quickly. Rex stopped 10 feet away. His head lowered. Every muscle in him became a line drawn toward that bag. Mark Ellis stepped in front of Emily. You're not allowed past this point. I'm not trying to go in, she said. Her eyes stayed on the bag. Why does he have the patient's belongings? The stranger smiled without showing teeth. Personal effects travel with the patient. Not in your hand, Marcus said from behind Emily. Not before release. Not before documentation. The man's smile thinned. Who are you? Someone who knows what a property log is. For the first time, the stranger looked unsettled. It was small, almost invisible, but Rex caught it. The German Shepherd moved one controlled step forward. Mark reached for him, but Emily spoke first. Leave him. Her voice did not rise. It carried anyway. The stranger turned toward Dr. Cole. I was told this would be handled. That sentence should have bothered everyone. It bothered Paul enough that he lowered the phone from his ear. Handled by whom, the man did not answer. Instead, he shifted the belongings bag behind his leg, and something inside it tapped softly against metal. Rex's eyes locked on the sound. Emily remembered the bent tag from the office, the one the chart had reduced to an unreadable personal item. Hayes D. It should have been sealed. It should have been logged. It should not have been traveling down a hallway in a stranger's grip. Open the bag, Emily said. Dr. Cole snapped. Nurse Carter, enough. Paul spoke over her. Mark, secure the patient belongings. Mark hesitated, caught between the doctor, who had commanded the room all night, and the administrator whose signature would matter in the morning. That hesitation was all the stranger needed. He turned as if offended, stepping toward the service elevator instead of the ICU doors. Rex moved. He did not attack. He crossed the distance in a low, fast line and planted himself in front of the elevator. The stranger jerked back, clutching the bag. A security officer shouted. Maria gasped. Daniel's monitor began to alarm faintly through the glass, a thin sound threading through the chaos like a warning from another room. Then the lights went out. Not all of them. The emergency strips along the floor glowed red, and the monitors inside the ICU stayed alive on backup power. But the hallway plunged into a dim, pulsing half-dark. Someone cursed. A radio crackled. The elevator doors opened and closed on no one. In those few seconds, bodies became shadows, and the stranger moved faster than a grieving cousin should have been able to move. Emily heard the belongings bag hit something. She heard Rex bark once, short and furious. She heard Marcus say, "Don't let him leave." When the lights flickered back, the stranger was no longer by the elevator. The bag lay on the floor, partly open, a cracked watch and torn cloth spilling out. Rex stood over it, breathing hard. But the folded authorization was gone from the man's hand, and so was a smaller brown file Emily had not noticed until its absence left a shape in her memory. Paul looked up at the ceiling. What happened to the cameras? Mark pressed his radio. Security desk, status on ICU corridor feed. The answer came through broken static. Camera 3 just glitched. We lost maybe 40 seconds. 40 seconds. Emily felt the number settle into her bones. Long enough to remove a document. Long enough to switch a file. Long enough for the truth to disappear in a hospital that would later call it a technical issue. Dr. Cole said nothing now, and her silence had changed. It was no longer confidence. It was calculation under pressure. Marcus knelt by the belongings bag with gloved hands. We need a witness, he said. Paul, stand here. Mark, you too. Nobody touches anything without saying it out loud. Emily stayed back because she knew Dr. Cole was waiting for one wrong move. Rex did not. He lowered his nose into the open bag and nudged aside the torn cloth. Beneath it lay the dog tag again, bent but visible, as if the blackout had shaken it loose from wherever someone had tried to hide it. Rex picked it up gently between his teeth and carried it to Emily. Mark started forward. Paul stopped him with one hand. Emily held out her palm. Rex dropped the tag into it and backed away. The metal was cold. Under the hallway lights, the name was clearer than before. Hayes D below it, scratched but present, was a partial number. On the reverse side, almost buried under abrasion, Emily saw two tiny letters stamped near the edge, NP Nolan Pierce, or something meant to connect Daniel Hayes to the name on the collar. Her hand tightened around the tag. The dog had not only guarded a patient, he had preserved a chain. A shout came from the service stairwell. One of the guards had found the stranger's coat abandoned on the landing, but not the stranger. Inside the pocket was the visitor sticker he had peeled off, a disposable phone with the battery removed, and a torn corner of a label. Mark brought the label back between two fingers. Paul read it aloud. Pierce/Hayes/K9 transfer. The words landed harder than any alarm. Emily looked toward the ICU. Through the glass, Daniel Hayes lay under the pale glow of backup monitors, unaware that his name had just returned to him in pieces. A collar, a dog tag, a torn label, a dog who refused to quit. Maria stood beside his bed now, finally watching the monitor the way Emily had begged her to. Her face changed as Daniel's pulse spiked again. Not from touch, not from treatment, but from the sound of Rex barking once outside the door. Rex turned his head toward bed 4 and whined, a low, broken sound that made the hallway stop pretending this was only about policy. Paul put the torn label into an evidence envelope. No transfer, he said. Not until legal clears this, and not until we know what that file was. Dr. Cole's voice came out thin. We don't even know there was a file. Marcus looked at the label, then at the dog, then at Emily. Yes, we do. At the far end of the corridor, the service elevator chimed. Rex went rigid. The doors opened just wide enough for Emily to see a small brown folder lying on the elevator floor, dropped or left behind in the blackout. Rex stepped forward before anyone else understood. On the folder's tab, written in fading black ink, were the words the stranger had tried to carry away before sunrise. Pierce Hayes K9 transfer. The folder lay alone on the service elevator floor, thin and brown and old enough that its edges had softened from years of being handled by people who never expected it to end up under hospital lights. For a second, no one stepped toward it. The elevator doors began to close, then bounced back open against Rex's shoulder as the German Shepherd moved in first, not with the rush of a loose animal, but with the certainty of a dog returning to something that had once belonged to his world. His nose lowered to the tab. Pierce Hayes K9 transfer. Then he turned his head toward Emily Carter, and the look in his eyes made the whole corridor feel like a room waiting for testimony. Do not touch that folder, Dr. Cole said. This time Emily did not move. She had learned the shape of the trap. If she reached first, they would call it theft. If she lifted the file, they would call it interference. If one page disappeared later, her name would be placed over the empty space like a label. So she held up both hands and looked at Paul Henson. Administrator Henson, you need to secure it, Paul swallowed. He was pale now, the tired gray of a man who had hoped the night would end as paperwork and was starting to understand it might end as evidence. Mark, he said, gloves, envelope, witnesses present. Mark Ellis hesitated, then pulled a pair of blue gloves from his belt pouch. He stepped carefully around Rex. The dog allowed him close enough to reach the folder, but only after Emily said softly, "Easy, Rex, let him." That mattered. Everyone heard it. The animal no one could control had just accepted a hospital security officer because the suspended nurse told him it was safe. Mark picked up the folder by its corners and placed it on a clean rolling tray. Paul asked Maria, Marcus, and Dr. Cole to stay as witnesses, Dr. Cole looked offended at the word, as if being asked to observe the truth insulted her authority. But she stayed. The first page was brittle, creased at the fold, with a faded header from a military veterinary and working dog program. Paul read slowly, stumbling over abbreviations he did not recognize. Marcus leaned in only enough to help with the plain meaning. Emergency K9 custody transfer. Canine name, Rex. Handler of record, Lieutenant Nolan Pierce. Contingent custody assignment upon death or incapacitation, Daniel Hayes. The hallway seemed to shrink around those words. Emily looked through the ICU glass. Daniel lay motionless beneath the ventilator tubing, bruises darkening under the flat white light. He had entered the hospital as a question mark. Now a file that someone had tried to steal before sunrise named him as the one person Rex was never supposed to be taken from. The collar had not been sentimental. It had matched a written order. Paul turned the page. Near the bottom was a note in blocky handwriting, scanned from something older. If Pierce is killed in operation, Rex stays with Hayes unless command verifies otherwise. Do not separate for civilian convenience. Do not release to private claimant. Marcus let out a breath through his nose. That's not pet ownership. That's custody tied to service. Dr. Cole's face tightened. This is an old document. We don't know its status. No, Emily said quietly. But we know enough to stop the transfer. Dr. Cole's eyes flashed toward her. You are still suspended, and he is still a patient. That should have been enough. It was not. A hospital could pivot faster than compassion when liability entered the room, Doctor. Cole took one step back, put professional distance between herself and the folder, and changed the story again. This document was found after Nurse Carter refused an order, interfered with security, and maintained control of an unauthorized animal. We need to consider whether the chain of custody has already been compromised. Emily stared at her. Rex brought the collar to me. The folder was found in the elevator after your visitor ran. My visitor, Dr. Cole repeated coldly. The man you were about to let into bed 4. The man who presented documentation while you escalated a dangerous situation. Rex rose at the tone in her voice. Not because he understood every word, but because he understood pressure, accusation, the shift of bodies before a threat became physical. Emily lowered one hand toward him, palm open. He stayed where he was, but his attention fixed on Dr. Cole. Paul rubbed his forehead. Vanessa, we are not blaming anyone until legal reviews this. Dr. Cole looked at the folder, then at the collar, then at Emily's missing badge, and Emily knew what conclusion the doctor had chosen. Not the truest one, the easiest one. Security should separate Nurse Carter from the evidence and the dog. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Doctor, the dog is calm right now. Because she has conditioned him to respond to her. We do not know what else she has done. The words entered Emily like ice. Around them, faces changed. Maria looked down. The young resident near the ACU doors suddenly became very interested in the floor. Paul did not speak quickly enough. That silence was all it took for suspicion to begin spreading its thin gray film over everything Emily had tried to protect. You think I planted this? Emily asked. I think you became emotionally involved with a patient, defied orders, and handled potential evidence while under disciplinary review. I read a collar the dog dropped at my feet. You admit you handled it. Emily almost laughed, but the sound would have broken in the middle. Of course I handled it. Everyone in this hallway saw why, Doctor. Cole turned to Paul. Until we know otherwise, she should be removed from the premises. Rex stepped in front of Emily before Mark could move. This time the gesture carried no drama. It was almost weary. The old K9 placed himself between her and the people closing in, as if protecting the nurse had simply been added to the same promise that kept him beside Daniel Hayes. His body was tired. Emily could see it now in the tremor near his back leg, the way his breathing had deepened after running through the hospital with the collar in his teeth. He was not invincible. He was old, loyal, and being asked to hold a line humans should have held for him. Rex, Emily whispered. His ear flicked. I'm okay. He did not believe her. Or maybe he understood that being okay was not the same as being safe. Paul finally found his voice. No one is taking her anywhere by force. But Emily, you need to step back from the folder. I already did. And from the dog. That hurt more. Rex turned his head toward her, and Emily felt something in her chest pull tight. If you separate him from me, he may panic. Dr. Cole seized on it. Exactly. No, Marcus said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the corridor. That dog has had 5 chances to hurt somebody tonight. He hasn't taken one. He blocked, warned, retrieved, and waited. That's training, Doctor. Cole rounded on him. You are an orderly, Mr. Bell. I was a corpsman before half this hallway knew how to spell triage. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was necessary. Marcus looked at Paul. You want safe? Give the dog a job he understands. Let him sit outside bed 4 where he can see Hayes. Keep Emily 10 feet away if you have to. But don't drag him out like a stray and act surprised when he fights you. Emily could have cried from gratitude, but there was no room for it. Daniel's monitor sounded again behind the glass, not a full alarm, just a warning tone from a body too stressed to be ignored. Maria turned back to the patient. This time she did not wait for permission. She stepped into bed 4, checked the lines, adjusted the light stimulation, and looked through the glass at Dr. Cole with a face that said she had finally seen enough. His pulse rises when we crowd the door, Maria called. It drops when the dog is visible. Dr. Cole closed her eyes for half a second. Paul pointed to the space outside bed 4. Rex stays in the corridor under security observation. No visitor access, no transfer. Legal gets the file. We call the Veterans Liaison. At the phrase Veterans Liaison, Dr. Cole stiffened. That is premature. Paul looked at the folder. Not anymore. Rex seemed to understand only one part, stays. He moved to the ICU glass and lowered himself to the floor outside Daniel's room, chest against the tile, eyes fixed on the unconscious man. The entire hallway watched his body settle. The dangerous dog had become the stillest thing in the hospital. Emily remained where Paul told her to stand, 10 feet from the folder, 20 from the patient, with no badge on her chest and the full weight of suspicion settling over her name. The file had proven that Rex belonged with Daniel Hayes, but it had not saved her. Not yet. Dr. Cole had found a new way to make the truth look like misconduct. Then Marcus leaned close enough that only Emily could hear him. "That number on the collar," he said. "I know somebody who might know where to send it." Emily looked at Rex, then through the glass at Daniel. The K9 had delivered the message. The file had confirmed the order. Now someone outside this hospital had to say it was real before the hospital buried the nurse with the evidence. Marcus straightened, reached for the phone at the nurse's station, and whispered the words that would change the rest of the night. "Get me the Veterans Liaison. Tell them it's about a Navy dog, a man named Hayes, and a dead SEAL named Nolan Pierce." Marcus Bell did not raise his voice when he made the call. That made it worse somehow. The hallway outside Bed 4 had already seen alarms. Accusations, a blackout, a missing visitor, a torn label, and an old German shepherd dragging truth out of places people had tried to seal shut. But Marcus spoke into the phone like a man reporting a fall risk or requesting an extra blanket, calm enough that anyone listening could miss the urgency inside every word. "This is St. Agnes Memorial," he said, "night shift ICU. I need the Veterans Liaison on call. It concerns a possible military working dog, an unconscious patient named Daniel Hayes, and a deceased Navy officer named Nolan Pierce." Emily Carter stood a few feet away, empty badge clip still pressed against her scrub top. She kept her hands folded in front of her so no one could accuse her of touching the folder again. Across the corridor, Rex lay outside Daniel's glass door with his chest against the tile and his eyes fixed on the bed. The old K9 had stopped pacing. That frightened Emily more than the growling had. A working dog became still when he knew movement would waste strength. "Doctor." Cole stood near the nurse's station, speaking quietly to Paul Henson and hospital legal through his phone. Emily could hear only pieces: liability. Unauthorized animal, chain of custody, suspended employee. Each phrase stepped carefully around the one question that mattered most. Why had an unverified man tried to move Daniel Hayes before sunrise with a stolen transfer folder? Maria Benton came out of Bed 4 and removed her gloves. Her face looked different now, stripped of the safe distance she had worn earlier. "His heart rate comes down when the dog is visible," she said to Paul. "It rises when we block the door or move him toward transport, doctor." Cole answered without looking at her. "Correlation is not clinical proof." "No," Maria said quietly, "but it is bedside observation. And we ignored it once already." The word surprised everyone, including Maria. Emily looked at her and Maria did not look away this time. It was not an apology yet, but it was the beginning of one. Marcus turned from the phone and covered the receiver. "They're transferring me to an on-call liaison. They want the collar number." Paul looked at Emily. "Can you read it without handling the collar again?" Emily nodded. The collar was on the rolling tray in a clear evidence sleeve now, placed flat under the desk lamp Paul had dragged from the supervisor's office. She leaned close, careful not to touch the plastic. The number looked even smaller through the sleeve, partly hidden by scratches and a repaired fold in the leather. She read it slowly, one letter and digit at a time. Marcus repeated it into the phone. There was silence on the line. Then Marcus's expression changed. Emily had seen that look before, when families heard something over the phone before the doctor came back into the room. It was the look of a person realizing the world had shifted while everyone else was still standing in the old version. Marcus listened, then said, "Yes, Mom, we have the dog here. German Shepherd, older male, faded working vest. Collar inscription reads, 'If I don't make it, Rex is with Hayes, signed N. Pierce.'" The hallway went very still. Rex lifted his head at the sound of the names. Daniel's fingers twitched beneath the sheet. Maria turned toward the monitor, and the pulse line bumped once, then steadied. Emily did not move. She was afraid that if she did, the moment would break before the truth finished arriving. Marcus put the call on speaker at Paul's request. A woman's voice came through, crisp but careful. "This is Elaine Porter, Veterans Liaison, Regional Emergency Desk. I cannot release protected service details over an open hospital line, but I can confirm that the K9 designation you provided is consistent with..." A retired military working dog record under the name Rex. Paul closed his eyes for half a second. And Nolan Pierce? A pause. Lieutenant Nolan Pierce is listed as deceased. Emily felt the words land through her body. Not surprising, not after the collar, but still heavy. A dead man's message had spent the night strapped to a dog everyone wanted removed. Elaine continued. Daniel Hayes appears in a restricted record connected to that file. I cannot confirm more without command authorization. I am advising you now. Do not transfer that patient to a private facility. Do not release the dog. Do not surrender any personal effects to a private claimant. Command verification is being escalated. Dr. Cole's face tightened. Miss Porter, this is Dr. Vanessa Cole. We have an ICU patient whose care is being disrupted by an unauthorized animal and a staff member under suspension. We cannot run a critical care unit according to an old collar. No one is asking you to, Elaine replied. Her voice stayed professional, but something colder entered it. I am asking you not to separate a possibly protected veteran from a service-linked K-9 until the record is verified. The word veteran passed through the hallway like a light being turned on in a room people had called empty. Daniel Hayes was no longer just a difficult, unidentified patient, not a drifter, not a problem to be moved before morning, a veteran. A man with a name, a record, and a dog lying guard outside his door. Paul spoke into the phone. We will hold transfer pending verification. Good, Elaine said. Who requested transfer? Paul looked toward Dr. Cole. Dr. Cole looked toward Mark Ellis. Mark looked toward the service corridor where the stranger had vanished and then reappeared under guard, no longer wearing his gray coat, his neat hair damp with sweat. 2 security officers had found him near a side exit, trying to use a staff hallway without a staff badge. Paul's voice hardened for the first time that night. That is what we are determining. The man straightened as everyone turned toward him. Without the coat, he looked smaller, not harmless but less polished. The visitor sticker was gone. The temporary transfer badge hung from a clip on his shirt, and Emily saw now that it had no department stamp, a prop, a detail meant to pass under tired eyes. I want my attorney, he said. You can have one, Paul replied. After you explain who authorized you to access this patient. I already provided paperwork. Hospital Legal's voice came through Paul's other phone. Sharp and awake now. The authorization does not match any document in our system. The signature block is a scan. The emergency contact number routes to a disposable line. There is no verified family relationship. Rex rose. He did it slowly, but every person in the corridor felt the change. The German Shepherd did not bark. He walked from bed 4's glass door to the center of the hallway and stopped between the stranger and the elevator. He placed himself there the way he had placed himself at the ICU doors earlier, a silent answer to a question the humans had taken hours to ask. The stranger stared at him. Get that thing away from me. Emily heard fear now, real fear, not of being bitten. Though Rex's size would have scared anyone, it was fear of recognition, fear of a witness with teeth, memory, and no interest in lies. Mark stepped behind the man and removed a wallet, a folded paper, and a small stack of business cards from his pocket. He had these on him. Paul took one card with gloved fingers, Valor Recovery Services, Private Asset Recovery and Estate Resolution. Marcus let out a bitter little breath. Estate resolution. For a man who isn't dead, the stranger snapped. You don't understand what you're interfering with. Emily looked at Daniel through the glass. Then explain it. He said nothing. Elaine Porter's voice came through the speaker again. Mr. Henson, secure that individual away from the patient. Local law enforcement should be notified. Command is sending a representative. Dr. Cole folded her arms. A representative from where? I am not cleared to provide details on this line. For all her authority, Dr. Cole could not argue with that. The room had moved beyond her preferred language of hospital policy into a world where the collar, the file, the dog tag, and Rex himself all pointed in the same direction. Emily saw the doctor realize it. She also saw something worse, Doctor. Cole was less frightened that Daniel had almost been taken than she was that Emily had been right. The stranger tried one last time. He stepped toward the elevator with the exhausted arrogance of a man used to doors opening before questions reached him. Rex moved with him. One step. No growl, no bite, just an old K-9 blocking the path with the patience of training and the weight of a promise. Mark took the man by the arm. This time, no one told him to wait. Daniel's monitor softened behind the glass. Maria looked down at the patient's hand and called Emily's name before she could stop herself. Emily turned. Daniel's fingers had curled slightly, not around anything, just closing as if searching for a shape that used to be there. Rex saw it too. His discipline broke for only a second. He looked back toward the bed and gave a small, wounded sound. Paul made a decision. Let the dog return to the door. Rex went at once. He lowered himself outside bed 4, nose almost touching the glass. Daniel's pulse settled again, number by number, as if his body recognized the guard even when his mind could not rise to meet him. At the far end of the ICU corridor, the main doors opened. The night air moved in first, colder than the hospital, carrying the faint smell of rain off the parking lot. A silver-haired man in a dark civilian suit stepped inside with 2 uniformed military police behind him. He did not ask where to go. His eyes went to Rex, then to the collar in the evidence sleeve, then to Daniel Hayes behind the glass. Rex stood. The man stopped in front of him and removed his hat slowly, as if entering a chapel. "I'm Commander Thomas Avery," he said, "and I need to see that collar." Commander Thomas Avery did not reach for the collar right away. He stood in the ICU corridor with his hat held against his chest, silver hair damp from the rain outside. Eyes moving slowly over the scene the way a man studies a battlefield after the noise has already passed. He saw the folder sealed in clear plastic on the rolling tray. He saw the bent dog tag beside it. He saw Emily Carter standing without a badge, watched by security as though the nurse who had protected the patient was somehow the danger. Then his gaze settled on Rex. The German Shepherd had not moved since the commander spoke. His body was rigid but not hostile. His ears were high. His scarred muzzle pointed forward. For the first time all night, Rex looked less like a dog defending against strangers and more like a soldier, waiting for the right voice to call him back from the edge. Commander Avery lowered himself slightly, not quite crouching, not diminishing his authority, but entering the dog's space with respect. "Rex," he said. The canine's breath caught. No one in the hallway spoke. Even Dr. Cole, who had spent most of the night filling silence with policy, held still. Rex took one step forward, then stopped. His eyes moved from the commander's face to the military police behind him, then back to Daniel Hayes behind the glass. He was measuring everything, the old training still alive inside an old body. Avery said one more word softer this time. "Stand easy." Rex exhaled. His shoulders dropped by inches, and the tension that had held the corridor hostage all night loosened around him. He did not wag his tail. He did not become a pet. He simply accepted that someone had arrived who understood the language of duty. Then, with slow dignity, he sat in front of Commander Avery. Marcus Bell bowed his head slightly. Emily saw it from the corner of her eye. The old corpsman had recognized the moment for what it was. Not obedience. Recognition. Commander Avery stood again and turned to Paul Henson. "The collar." Paul lifted the evidence sleeve with both hands. "We preserved it after it was brought to Nurse Carter by the dog doctor." Cole quickly added, "After the nurse had already been suspended and after significant disruption to patient care." Avery did not look at her. "I asked for the collar, doctor." The words were not loud, but they removed the air from Dr. Cole's argument. Paul handed over the sleeve. Avery did not open it yet. He looked through the clear plastic, reading first the worn tag, then the inner strip of metal Emily had angled under the desk lamp. As his eyes found the engraving, something in his face changed so subtly that only people used to grief would have noticed. Emily noticed. Marcus noticed. Rex noticed most of all. Avery read the words aloud, not for drama, but like a record being restored to its proper place. "If I don't make it, Rex stays with Hayes." He paused before the signature. The pause was long enough to hold a dead man, N. Pierce. The military police behind him lowered their eyes. Emily felt her own throat tighten, though she had already read the inscription. Hearing it in Commander Avery's voice changed it. The sentence no longer sounded like a clue. It sounded like a promise spoken across years, carried by leather, scars, and a dog who had refused to let humans erase it. Avery looked the ICU glass at Daniel. Lieutenant Nolan Pierce wrote that, after an extraction that went wrong, Hayes was the last man with him. Dr. Cole folded her arms, but the gesture had lost its power. "Commander, with respect, our patient arrived unidentified and medically unstable. We had no reliable information." Avery turned to her then. His expression stayed controlled, which somehow made it worse. "You had a dog who would not leave him. A collar with a custody order, a dog tag with his name, and a file someone attempted to remove from your hospital. This facility has procedures." "So did we," Avery said, and Daniel Hayes broke none of the ones that mattered. The hallway seemed to lean toward him. Avery handed the collar back to Paul only after touching 2 fingers briefly to the plastic over Nolan Pierce's name. Then he asked to see the folder. Paul placed it on the tray, and the commander read the first 2 pages without speaking. His eyes moved quickly, but each page seemed to take something from him. When he reached the handwritten note at the bottom, his jaw tightened. Marcus said quietly, "It's real, isn't it?" Avery nodded. "It's real. The word settled over the hospital like a verdict. Rex rose and turned toward Daniel's room, as if real was the only permission he had been waiting for. But he did not enter. He looked at Emily first. That nearly undid her. After everything the hospital had done to remove her, accuse her, and separate her from the truth, the old K9 still checked with her before crossing the final distance. Avery noticed. His eyes moved from Rex to Emily's empty badge clip. "You're Nurse Carter?" "Yes, sir." "You were the one who kept him from being removed?" Emily glanced at Dr. Cole, then back to the commander. "I tried to keep the patient safe. That is not what I asked." Emily swallowed. "Yes, I trusted the dog." Rex gave a small breath through his nose, almost as if he approved of the correction. Avery nodded once. "Good, one word, that was all. But after hours of being called emotional, unsafe, insubordinate, and compromised, that single word landed harder than praise." Emily looked down because if she kept looking at him, her face might show too much. Avery turned to Dr. Cole. "Who authorized the transfer?" The question struck the corridor with the force of a door slamming. Dr. Cole's mouth opened, then closed. Paul answered before she could form a safer version. "A man claiming to be family present documents. Legal has since flagged them as invalid. He was also found carrying materials related to the patient's belongings and this transfer file." "Where is he?" Mark Ellis pointed toward a side office where the two security guards had placed the stranger under watch. "Held for local police." Avery's face did not change, but one of the military police behind him stepped away to make a call. The commander looked back through the glass at Daniel. He was never supposed to be separated from Rex without command verification. Dr. Cole said, "Commander, that may be true on paper, but this is a civilian ICU. We cannot allow an animal in a sterile, critical environment indefinitely." Avery finally gave her his full attention. "Doctor, no one is asking you to abandon infection control. Post a handler outside the door. Keep the dog in the corridor if that is what your policy allows. But you will not transfer Hayes. You will not release Rex. You will not surrender his belongings. And you will not blame the nurse who noticed what your system missed." Dr. Cole went very still. Maria Benton, standing just inside bed 4, lowered her eyes. Emily knew Maria was not being shamed by the commander's words. She was being awakened by them. Avery moved to the ICU glass. Daniel's face looked older under the monitors than his 41 years should have allowed. Bruises had darkened along his jaw. His hand lay half-curled on the sheet, the same hand that had searched blindly when Rex was kept away. Avery placed his palm lightly against the glass. "Chief Daniel Hayes," he said, voice lower now. "Not meant for the hallway, but heard by everyone anyway. You stubborn son of a gun." It was the first time anyone had spoken Daniel's name like it belonged to a person instead of a chart. Rex stepped beside him. Avery looked at Paul. "Can he see him?" Paul turned to Maria. Maria checked the line placement, the floor space, the door, the monitors. She did it as a nurse, not as someone asking permission to care. "1 minute," she said, controlled. "Dog stays on the floor. No contact with lines, doctor." Cole looked as if she wanted to object. She did not. Emily opened the ICU door because Maria nodded toward her, and no one stopped her this time. Rex entered slowly, every step careful, as if the room itself were sacred. He did not jump on the bed. He did not disturb the tubing. He walked to the side where Daniel's hand rested near the rail and lowered himself to the floor. Then he placed his muzzle beneath Daniel's fingers without lifting them. The monitor softened almost immediately. No machine could explain loyalty, but every person in that room watched the numbers settle in its presence. Avery stood at the foot of the bed. Hayes didn't leave Nolan Pierce. He said, still watching Daniel. That was the rumor that followed him because the first report was incomplete and the men who knew the truth were either dead, wounded, or ordered silent while the review dragged on. Hayes went back under fire for Pierce and for Rex. He stayed beyond the extraction window. He carried Rex out when the dog was hit. He tried to carry Nolan too. Emily looked at the old German shepherd. The scars made sense now in a way they had not before. Avery's voice roughened, but he kept control. Pierce knew he wasn't coming home. That collar was his last instruction. Rex stays with Hayes. Because Hayes was the one man Pierce trusted to keep living after everyone else was gone. Daniel's fingers moved. Rex felt it before anyone else. His head lifted only slightly, enough for Daniel's fingertips to brush the fur between his ears. The contact was so small it might have been missed in a louder room. But the ICU had gone silent, and quiet truth does not need much space. Commander Avery reached into his coat and removed a small cloth pouch. From it, he took a second dog tag, cleaner than the bent one from Daniel's belongings but scratched with age. This was Pierce's, he said. It was supposed to be returned with the completed record. It never was. He laid it beside Daniel's hand. Emily watched Rex close his eyes for the first time all night. Avery looked back toward the hallway, toward Paul, Dr. Cole, Mark, Maria, Marcus, and the evidence tray holding the pieces of a story nearly buried by convenience. Daniel Hayes was never a drifter, the commander said. He was never a violent unknown. He was a decorated Navy SEAL who came home carrying a promise no one bothered to read. Then he turned to Emily, and this nurse was the first person in this hospital who listened. For a long moment after Commander Avery spoke, the ICU did not feel like a hospital anymore. It felt like a room where a name had finally come home. Daniel Hayes lay beneath the soft rhythm of machines, bruised and pale, with Rex's muzzle resting beneath his fingers and Nolan Pierce's old dog tag beside his hand. No one moved quickly. No one wanted to break the silence that had formed around the bed. Even Dr. Vanessa Cole, who had spent the night turning every warning into a policy problem, stood outside the glass with her arms no longer folded. Emily Carter remained near the door, unsure whether she was allowed to be there, and more unsure whether leaving would hurt worse. Her badge was still gone. Her suspension form still existed somewhere with her name written under phrases that made compassion look like misconduct. But Rex had stopped guarding the hallway. Daniel's pulse had settled. Commander Avery had named the truth in front of everyone who had tried to move past it. For the first time since the German Shepherd hit the ICU doors, Emily felt the night take a breath. Daniel's fingers moved again, barely, just enough to sink into Rex's fur. The dog opened his eyes. Every person in the room saw the change. Rex did not lift his head fast or bark for attention. He simply pressed closer to the bed rail, careful of every tube, every wire, every inch of sterile space. He knew the boundary now. He knew Emily had trusted him, Maria had made room for him, and Commander Avery had understood him. The old K-9 did not need to fight the hospital anymore. He only needed to be close enough for Daniel Hayes to know he had not been left. Maria checked the monitor and adjusted one lead that had loosened near Daniel's shoulder. She did not make a speech. She did not apologize in front of the room, but when she passed Emily, she paused and whispered, "You were right to push." Emily looked at her. "You were right to look again." That was all they said, and it was enough. Hospitals did not heal only through dramatic apologies. Sometimes they healed through one exhausted nurse choosing not to look away the second time. Commander Avery stepped beside Daniel's bed. His voice softened. "Chief Hayes, it's Avery. You're at St. Agnes Memorial. Rex is with you." He glanced down at the dog tag. "Pierce is with you too." Daniel's eyelids fluttered. Rex became perfectly still. Emily felt the room lean toward the bed. Daniel did not wake the way people did in movies. There was no sudden strength, no complete sentence, no miracle that erased trauma. He came back slowly, through pain and confusion, through the noise of machines and the fog of medication. His eyes opened only partway at first, unfocused and glassy. They moved past the ceiling, past the light, past the faces he did not recognize. Then they found Rex. The change in him was small but unmistakable. His brow softened. His fingers curled with purpose this time, weakly gathering fur between them. Rex gave one low whine, a sound so old and broken that Emily had to look away for a second. Daniel's mouth moved. Maria leaned closer, listening as a nurse, careful and calm. "Don't try to talk yet," but Daniel tried anyway. One word came out rough, barely more than air. "Rex." The German Shepherd closed his eyes and laid his head fully beneath Daniel's hand. Commander Avery bowed his head. Behind the glass, Marcus Bell removed his cap and held it against his chest. Mark Ellis stood with both hands folded in front of him, no longer reaching for ropes, radios, or restraint. The two military police remained at the door like quiet witnesses, their presence no longer threatening, only protective. Paul Henson returned from the side office with hospital legal still on his phone. His face carried the drained look of a man who had just watched a simple administrative problem become a moral audit. He waited until Maria finished checking Daniel's vitals, then spoke from the doorway. "The transfer is formally canceled. Local police have taken custody of the man claiming to be family. Legal confirmed the documents were falsified." Dr. Cole stared at the floor. Paul continued, "Daniel Hayes' belongings are secured. The folder, collar, and dog tags will be held with chain of custody documentation until Commander Avery's office receives them through proper channels." Avery nodded. "Good." Paul looked toward Emily, and for the first time all night, he seemed unable to hide behind procedure. "Nurse Carter, your suspension is being withdrawn pending final review." Emily almost smiled at the careful language. Pending final review, even now. The hospital could not hand back dignity without wrapping it in paperwork first. Commander Avery turned his head slowly. Paul seemed to understand. After a pause, the administrator corrected himself. Your suspension is withdrawn. Your badge should never have been taken before your concerns were documented. He removed the badge from a small envelope and held it out. Emily looked at it for a second before taking it. The plastic felt warm from his hand, scratched in the same corner, ordinary in every way. But when she clipped it back onto her scrub top, it felt less like a job being returned and more like a witness being allowed back into her own story. Dr. Cole lifted her eyes. The hallway waited. Emily did not need an apology to make the truth real, but she knew everyone was listening to see whether the doctor would offer one. I misjudged the situation, Dr. Cole said at last. The words were stiff, not graceful, and clearly painful for her. I should have verified the visitor before allowing the matter to escalate. Emily held her gaze. You should have listened when the patient reacted. Dr. Cole's face tightened, but she did not argue. And when Rex warned us, Emily added. At the sound of his name, Rex's ear flicked, but he did not lift his head from Daniel's hand. He had no interest in being praised by the people who had doubted him. His reward was right there in the bed. A breathing man, a promise kept, a name restored. Commander Avery walked to Emily. He did not offer grand words. Men like him seemed to distrust them. Instead, he held out Nolan Pierce's dog tag, the one he had placed beside Daniel's hand, then stopped and looked back at the bed. Daniel's fingers had drifted near it, touching the metal edge as if he knew its shape through memory alone. Avery changed his mind. He left the tag where it was and spoke quietly. Pierce wanted that with Hayes. He wanted Rex with Hayes. He knew what people might say if the record was incomplete. He knew Hayes would blame himself. Daniel's eyes were open again, wet at the corners. He could not speak, but he heard, that was clear. Avery leaned closer to him. The review is over, Chief. It should have been said years ago. You did not abandon Nolan Pierce. You went back for him. You brought Rex home. And tonight, Rex brought you home. Daniel's hand trembled against the dog's head. Rex shifted just enough to support the movement. No one clapped. No one celebrated. The justice that arrived in that ICU was too quiet for that. It came as a corrected chart, a canceled transfer, a badge returned. A false claimant removed through a side hallway. A commander speaking the sentence a wounded man had needed for years. A nurse standing with red eyes and steady hands while the dog she trusted finally rested. Near dawn, the first gray light touched the ICU windows. The storm had passed without anyone noticing. Maria dimmed the room lights. Marcus brought Emily a cup of coffee she had not asked for. The way old hospital workers cared for people without making them admit they needed care. Mark placed a clean chair outside bed for Rex's watch position and said nothing when the dog ignored it and stayed beside Daniel. Emily stood at the glass one last time before her shift officially ended. Rex lay on the floor now, body curved along the bed, breathing slow. Daniel's hand rested on his head. Nolan Pierce's tag lay near Daniel's wrist. The old collar had been photographed, sealed, and documented, but Emily could still see the words in her mind as clearly as if they were written across the morning itself. If I don't make it, Rex stays with Hayes. The dog had known first, the nurse had believed him, and the truth had come out, not with sirens or revenge, but with a name spoken correctly in a quiet room. Before this story fades tonight, leave one word for the nurse who listened, the canine who never gave up, and the soldier whose honor finally came home.